I admit the title of this video might appear a bit clickbaity. After all, the de facto idea behind social media is that it enhances the freedom of speech or freedom of expression, which is a key component of any democratic system. But after interacting with social media for nearly 2 decades, I think we can now assess the initial premise that democracy and social media go hand in hand. In fact, I think we can ask the question whether social media and democracy are in fact compatible. But before that, let's first dive into some material that will provide context for us and set up the environment to discuss this particular statement. On the one hand, social media has been very effective in platforming social activists, journalists, and also it has been a very important space in organizing social movements. But on the other hand, it has also platformed extremists, and it has also been a very important conduit for spreading misinformation and conspiracy theories. So let's start by conceptualizing what counts as social media and what doesn't. Social media is a platform to facilitate exchange of information between users. Therefore, the primary component of social media is user-generated content. If we go with the OECD definition of user-generated content, then we can say that user-generated content has to fulfill 3 basic requirements. The first requirement is that it must be published in a publicly accessible website or social networking site, which means something like email doesn't count, and even private messages. Those don't really count as social media. The second requirement is that it needs to show a certain amount of creativity. The third requirement is that it has to be created outside of professional routines and practices. This means that commercial content doesn't count. Those are ads. Also, government communication is not really social media. A software focused on delivering user-generated content is therefore referred to as social media. If that is the primary goal of a software, to deliver user-generated content, then that platform can be termed as a social media platform. That means we are talking about platform like the one we are in, YouTube, TikTok, Twitter, X, Blue Sky, etc. People use social media for various purposes. Everyone has their own objective that they want to achieve in a social media platform. Some people are there just to socialize. Some people are there to make money. Others are there for political activism, and many other uses. Most importantly, the idea behind social media or sharing any form of information is that of communication. Traditionally, the dominant assumption behind the goal of communication is that the goal of any communication is the resolution of ambiguity and reduction of uncertainty. However, as we all know, that's not really 100% the case in today's world. Communication is not just about resolving ambiguity or reducing uncertainty. Sometimes the goal of communication, especially in the social media context, is that people want to control the impressions other people have of them. In a world where the impressions other people have of you are very crucial in getting a job, dates, and many other social rewards, it makes sense that personal branding is one of the main purposes of social media. Everyone wants to align their image and their personal identity. This of course means that social media success is often accompanied by high levels of self-disclosure. People have to share certain aspects of their lives, whether true or exaggerated or even false, but they do have to share them in order to create a certain impression about themselves on the eyes of the consumer of their content. Social media is a perfect place for individuals to express themselves, but for businesses and governments, social media is a very tricky place. If you think about the nature of social media, is that it's very fast-paced. What could be trendy today could have disappeared from the social space tomorrow. In the age of social media, businesses and government increasingly have less control over information about them in the cyberspace. Think about how before social media, governments and businesses disclose their information through PR managers and other forms of press announcements and bulletins. This meant that businesses and governments had control over the information about them in the public space. However, today, thanks to how easy it is for people to create things like blogs and websites. A simple Google search will reveal information about a company. The information available out there about companies and businesses sometimes is very much against their liking. The information could be from a whistleblower, or it could be just from somebody who hates the company, an activist. It could come from a variety of sources. Of course, governments and companies try to bend narratives to favor them on social media platform, but it's difficult, considering that in order for you to be really social, you have to be very active, you have to be interesting, you have to be humble, you have to be honest, and most importantly, you have to be unprofessional. The moment you are too professional, you become uninteresting. This makes it hard for governments and corporate, because being professional is a central part of their identity. The moment they are unprofessional, then they might end up sending the wrong message about their company, and it might tarnish their brands. And even when companies and governments make communication in the style that they like, people can reply and commentate on that information and provide different perspectives, some of which may not be what the company would want, or other commentaries are actually in favor of governments and businesses. But sometimes commentary might not be in line with companies' goals and brand. With that basic introduction to social media, I don't think I need to dwell too much into that. We all know what social media is. Let's shift our focus to democracy for a second. Democracy is arguably the most abused and misused term in politics. If you think about the most authoritarian state in the world, it would probably be North Korea. And yet, the official name of North Korea is the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. A president like Kagame of Rwanda once said that if people can do business at night, then that's democracy. And in Kenya, a deputy president said that democracy is the dictatorship of the winning party. So I think it will be important for us to define what counts as democracy moving forward. Today, if you ask most of the people what democracy is, they'll say that democracy is a system of governance that gives room for political competition. However, competition has not always been considered an essential defining condition of democracy. Classic democracies presume decision-making based on direct participation, leading to consensus. The assembled citizenry was expected to agree on a common course of action after listening to the alternatives and weighing based on their respective merits and demerits. Basically, democracy is a system that allows people to express themselves, whether in agreement or in opposition, without any form of victimization or political suppression. Sometimes in democracies, minorities do exist, and the most effective way of protecting minorities lies in everyday operation of interest association and social movement. For the minorities to get their way, they have to petition to the majority. Most of the time, they employ social movements, campaigns, and other forms of activism to make their case to the majority so that they too can be part of the democratic process. Voting is an essential component of modern-day democracies. The most dominant definition of democracy out there is that democracy is a government by the people, for the people, and of the people. The by the people part means that people have to vote for who they want to govern them. And so, in contemporary political discourse, this phenomenon of cooperation and deliberation via autonomous group activity goes under the rubric of civil society. However, we all know that in modern democracies, while votes play a very big factor in the direction of a nation, the most important thing is influence. If you have influence, then most things will go your way. Votes are a way of counting that influence. Quote, in modern democracies, votes may be counted, but influences alone are weighted. While votes might decide who gets in office, it is influence that enables us to achieve the other key goals of democracy. In order to achieve a key goal like accountability, for instance, and hold leaders accountable by the citizenry have to be influential enough. They have to organize themselves properly. Influence is a key component of democracy. It is in fact what decides the direction a democratic country will go politically. For you to hold leaders accountable, you have to be influential. For you to win an election, you have to be influential. And even if everyone has the freedom of expression, not everybody's voice counts the same way. The more influential a person is, the more weight their message is given. Now that we have clarified what we mean by social media and democracy in this video, let's talk about how social media and democratic societies interact. As we saw earlier in the video, social media in its basic form is a platform that allows for self-disclosure of people. Self-disclosure is a tricky subject. For one, it allows people to build their brand, connect with people who are of like mind, and probably even connect people to jobs and romantic partners. It's a way to socialize. The only realistic way towards socialization is through self-disclosure. You have to be vulnerable and put yourself out there and let people know who you are as a person. The disadvantage of this is that it makes people vulnerable to insults, and it's also a privacy nightmare. You have to be very careful about how you approach self-disclosure. Moving forward, we will focus on the political contributions of social media, and here we are first greeted by two contrary points. One is that social media allows more access to information, and that means a more informed populace, which means people get to interact with political content more. This can be seen in the modern world, for instance, the way people have opinions, the way people engage with politics. People know about what's happening in their country. People know about the policies that are being made. People know about the social movements available. People know a lot about what's happening in their country. But the second contrary point is that people don't get properly informed by social media, because social media only provides snippets of information about a complex political issue. This means that people engage with political issues that they don't fully understand. You can see this a lot in X, where conspiracy theories are having a field day today because they do know things that are happening, they do know policies that are being implemented, but they don't fully grasp the deep extent of these policies. This means that we get a population that engages with politics without deep knowledge of these political issues. The simplest explanation of this is when people argue about communism and capitalism and socialism, and yet when you listen to them, none of them really grasp what they are talking about when they say capitalism or communism, and even neoliberalism. Another example of this is, if you look in the US right now, there is a measles pandemic going on, because everyone is having an opinion on something they don't really know about, and yet they know everything that is happening, so they can have an opinion on multiple issues, none of which they understand. And because we are in a democracy, then their opinion do count, their opinion do matter. The more people talk about something and in a certain way, the more they are able to influence certain policy makers in a certain way.
60 days from now, we put out the prescription. So we will put out a series of policies to address this issue and to eliminate the chronic.
Of all the ways of communicating in today's world, I think social media is the best at political expression. Leaders and other influential people in society can say what they believe in, they can communicate their policies, and they can get their reply immediately. People can provide feedback, others can provide critique, almost in real time and directly in the comments. They can do this in form of video or audio. Today, political expression is very high thanks to social media. However, political expression is conceptually distinct from political participation in the way that political talk is distinct from political action. Political participation is a different thing, and I do believe that social media has also contributed to it. Political participation is where people not only express their views but also act on their views. The most dominant forms of political participation are lobbying and activism. Protests are also very potent forms of political participation, especially in issues that a lot of people care about. Political expression can lead to political action, and social media has proven that it's a very, very vital tool for this. Political expression might work to enable political action by causing the expresser to alter his or her perception from observer to participant. Expression may be the first step towards better citizenship by motivating exposure, attention, and collaboration of media messages. Also, in social media, as individuals compose messages in their minds, information and pieces of knowledge become organized as they are transformed into language. This process may lead people to reflect about their views, thereby occasionally resulting in a new way of thinking. As social media matures from the thing that made the internet cool to the modern day where it has become a political tool, it has changed its main purpose from being a place where people could interact to actually being a news source. X has often been presented as the main news source in the world by its owner, Elon Musk. But social media as a news source presents certain challenges that don't exist with traditional media. An example of such challenge is that if you look at the way traditional media was disseminated, it was done to everyone at the same time, everyone who was watching at least. That meant that everyone who consumed information from this media received the same information. They could interpret it the way they want, but they all had the same thing. We can already tell that that's not how social media work. The information you receive is dependent on who has sent that information. And the person that you follow, the person who provides news to you, can be very different from the person that another guy uses to get their information. And the kind of news you receive is also dependent on the people you follow and the kind of news that algorithms want you to see. And the way they air this news is dependent on who that person is, their belief systems and culture and things like that. And also what they want you to get from that information. This creates some kind of a social news gap. Like, we all had the same news, talking about the same things, but they could have been told by two different people with two totally different objectives, and therefore their selection of words and the selection of the things they decide to focus on are two very different things, meaning that we both get the same information, actually not the same information, but we both get information about the same news, but we have two very different conceptualization of the same thing, and that conceptualization is not actually 100% accurate, but biased based on a certain perspective. The person who gave you a particular information gives you that information with an intention in mind of how they intend you to use that information. This means that when, say, two people are arguing about certain issues that they had from a social media news source, they could both be arguing about the same thing, but from two very different, separate contexts, and both of them don't understand each other's context because they don't know where the other got information, and they don't 100% know what the other person knows. And like in traditional media, we both know what we watched, we both received the same information, which means we come from the same context even if we are debating against each other. And this makes one person think the other person is either not fully informed or misinformed. And it's not a good idea to have two people thinking that the other person is informed and they are the one with better information. So if both of them thinks that way about the other, then it's not a good position to be in when you are presenting arguments. Social media news is also very highly curated. It all depends on what the algorithm thinks you will like based on your previous interactions, which means you can get very one-sided views. This of course is dangerous because it creates filter bubbles. It leads a certain demographic to only receive information that is in line with the belief systems of that demographic, and it doesn't receive any viewpoints opposing that belief system. And this affects the democratic process, because if the idea behind a democracy is about people deliberating on certain issues until they come to an agreement on a particular issue, then it can become really hard if people cannot really understand each other and they cannot understand the context from which the other person is coming from. It makes discourse really difficult. And even the essence of discourse is that you get to present your views and the other group gets to hear your views, and you can then discuss based on certain factors which between the views gets to go through. But if you don't hear the other person's views and that person doesn't even hear your views, that becomes a problem. And this sometimes even goes to the whole platform. Sometimes even it's not just about the algorithm, because like today, X, for instance, is dominated by right-wing content, while another platform like Blue Sky is dominated by left-wing content. And in platforms like Reddit, people can create communities
exclusively to discuss a particular idea in a particular viewpoint. So you have whole social media platforms dedicated to a particular way of viewing the world. And then within those social media platforms, you have algorithms that further shapes your view of the world.
Social media is also very fast-paced. There is always a new story. There is always something new to care about. And this can cause news fatigue. If you get so invested in a lot of news, some of these news are very horrible. Every day we get to see people suffering. Today you are thinking about Israel and Palestine. Tomorrow you are thinking about an earthquake in Myanmar or Turkey. Another day you are thinking about protests in Kenya. Another day you have to worry about the F word being assigned to a particular political group in the US. And there are other minor news that comes every day. And all of this demand your attention, demand your care. It can be really exhausting. Some end up dissociating from this news because there is just so much you can care about. Activism and social justice is a very draining experience. Most activists end up depressed. This is a very huge challenge with social media in that the amount of news being bombarded at any particular time, it's too much that it either leads people to get news fatigue or it leads other people to get desensitized to certain news.
Another problem of social media that is often overlooked is the way it has made our world appear really complex. In its early days, it was considered to make the world seem like a global village, but we are no longer in the early days of social media. It was often assumed that the interconnectivity and the ease of flow of information in the world would make the world appear like a global village. For a short while, it did seem so. We were able to get news about any part of the world just with the tap of a finger, instantly, without even having to wait at a particular time like we had to do with traditional news source. However, as more and more people got online, information became more varied and complex. You have some people speaking about a genocide happening on one part of the world, other people speaking about an earthquake that just happened on another part, other people are celebrating another thing, other people are having elections, other people are having their own social issues. There are protests and things like that. Social media has also incentivized people to specialize on certain things. You could get on Twitter and only see news about tech. You could get on another platform and only see news about a particular thing. Of course, the algorithms have a very huge role to play in that. But it's also the fact that people like to create tribes. And social media does make it easier for people to form tribes based on what they believe, based on what they think, based on their careers, and based on such things that they use to form their identities. And that means that social media platform can be specialized for some people in that there are people who will only be seeing tech news, others will be seeing science news, others will be seeing news about global politics and geopolitics, others will be seeing news about local politics, others will be looking at news from a climate change perspective, and that is what they'll be seeing on social media. And many other things that people do care about. Social media will give you that which you care about, and it will help you specialize and niche down on that particular thing, whether you are a consumer or a producer. Social media will lead you towards a particular niche. The truth is that the world was always complex. Attempts at making the world a global village would always encounter the problem of that complexity of information. This complexity is often daunting to a lot of people when they are bombarded with all of this information, even from their own niche. Sometimes it becomes difficult to process. It sometimes leads people to actually question their power. And when people start to question their power and their abilities, it becomes very difficult for them to influence change. I think the rise of social media has also led to the rise of doomerism. People are starting to understand just how complex the world is. Of course, the idea that the world is complex was always there to people, but social media has just provided that proof that the world is really complex. This leads people to take themselves back in little information cages, and they decide to only focus on particular informations that they care about. And this means that in those that they decide not to focus on, they get misled by other people who have their own ambitions, when people get bombarded with all this information, they start to question just how much control they have. And this leads people to actually question their power in those particular things. And sometimes it is okay sometimes there are things that you can't control, but sometimes this questioning of their power and abilities often lead them to actually ignore things that they actually have control over. They just sign off and forget about everything. Some people just sign off politics and get done with it. Some people do get news about certain political things that they care about, but because of how they have conceptualized the world as very complex and that they don't have any power to change anything. After all, there is like 8 billion people on Earth, and individual countries have millions of people. So this means that when people receive the information, they see that they don't have power as individuals, and that leads them to nihilistic doomerism. When you couple this with news fatigue that we discussed a few minutes ago, then you get to see the problem that I'm trying to point out, where you have a population that is a lot more informed, but that information is not leading to political fruits because people don't even believe that they can change anything, that their actions do not even matter. Conspiracy theories have also been having a very easy time in this age of information overload. When there is a lot of information out there about a lot of different things, some people will try to find connections between this information in order to try to make sense of it. Conspiracy theories leads people to connect things that aren't even connected, and they end up treating those new connections as facts in and of themselves instead of opinions. And this is not really good for the democratic process because some people are arguing from a point that is very detached, and yet they cling on this information and facts in quotes very tightly. They are not willing to let go of it, much like people in a cult or a religion. The level of interconnectivity we have in the world has led this period to be termed as the age of information, and social media is often seen by a lot of people as the central part of this age. While this is true, it has been misused, where there are people who think they are well informed by virtue of them being on the internet in social media platforms discussing things daily. But this is contrary to what we see in real life. Social media doesn't really give people enough knowledge. It just gives little snippets about information that don't really go into the details. They don't provide context. Just little snippets of information that people are supposed to know how to work with. And a lot of people get to treat these snippets of information as complete truths in and of themselves without really doing research. It's not uncommon to open a social media post with a link and find in the comments people commenting on certain ways that actually tell you that they didn't even read the posts. They didn't even click on the link to read what the link was discussing. They just read the headline and made the conclusion from that. The problem with this approach is that a lot of articles don't provide headlines that match their content. Most headlines are meant for clicks, so they are often put in a clickbaity way. Yeah, and so when you have a lot of people who are not really engaging with links and articles, they only care about the headlines. And you have headlines that are not really descriptive of the content, but are just clickbaity titles to get people to click. Then you get a really bad concoction that results in people who are neither informed nor care about information, but they do believe that they do know about the things they are talking about, where indeed they actually don't really know. And some people will often use a screenshot of that headline of that article to make discussions and conclusions in other platforms and use it to make their point. And it's not just about links that people don't click. Sometimes people just post things that they just made up, and other people come to comment and argue with that information as if it's true. People interact with it and they provide critiques, they provide argument. Some even end up supporting it, and yet the foundation of it was just something that someone just made up and posted. So you have people who think they are well informed. They think that what they read is true. Well, by what they read, I mean what they agree with. They think that they can differentiate between truth and lies. And so most of the time, whatever they agree with, they think is automatically true and don't even research deeply on it. Whatever they disagree with, it's mostly lies. And the fact that a lot of people do know that there is a lot of lies going on in social media means that they can just look at something they disagree with and flag it as a lie. And they also know that social media makes them well informed, which means that they can look at something and see it as truth. I don't think I need to explain what could go wrong when people have such perspectives. This is where we have a different kind of gap, where people who are already educated, they can be able to filter information that is not up to par with information standards, and they get to interact with variable information. A lot of educated people will read papers, read articles in details, and analyze them in details to actually separate the facts from bullshit. The internet is truly an information hub if you know what you are looking for, if you can be able to filter out the information, if you can read research papers. It's very helpful. But if you don't make an effort to look for these things, if you don't make an effort to read research papers, if you don't make an effort to read actual speeches, and only depend on simplified version, only depend on commentaries, then you'll get a very distorted view. So you have on one side educated people who can get even more educated from the internet, and you have less knowledgeable people who can get even worse. The internet gives access to textbooks and other reading materials that would be very expensive to read otherwise, which means any educated person can get what they are looking for, even if they are not rich, even if they are not from a developed economy, even if they are not from the part of the world where that textbook is offered. They can get it as long as they can read the language the book is written in. Information is actually freely available. The internet is a huge digital library for a lot of people. If you are already educated, you can get so much more information from the internet. It's easy to get information from other fields today more than ever before, even if that is not what is studied in school. People can get to know a lot about other subjects. Sure, they might not know as much as the experts in that field, but they can know enough to make decisions. And that means that you can get individuals who are highly educated. They know the things from whatever they decided to focus on, like if a scientist can know a lot of science, but in addition to that, they can know a lot about other fields if they are willing to know about those fields. And this creates a huge information disparity because you have some people who think they are well informed, but they are not really well informed because they only interacted with information on a surface level. And maybe that information was not true, or maybe it was true, but they only interacted with it on a very surface level. They don't know the details, nitty-gritties, and context of that information. While on the other hand, you have professionals who know more about their fields, who know more about other fields. They have gone into details of information. They know what they are talking about. They are well informed all around, and they have absorbed information from a lot of viewpoints. And so when these two groups disagree, one group already know a lot, and they are trying to make that case to the other group, but the other group thinks they know a lot, and so they oppose this group that actually know a lot, when they themselves don't really know that much. And when you have such kind of a society, then you get the perfect recipe for anti-intellectualism. You know, at least in the days where there are people who didn't know a lot and they actually knew they don't know a lot, so they could readily accept information from experts. And that becomes a really huge problem when you really need this expert information to be used in policy. People don't like to be corrected. I think the social mobility information crisis is not being talked about enough. We often talk about social mobility in terms of economics because it's easy to look at somebody who doesn't have money, somebody who is economically disadvantaged, and somebody who is actually rich and wealthy and say, like, okay, this person is unable to get from this point to that point even with education. And we can have information about social mobility in terms of economics because poor people are not really ashamed of thinking that they are poor. While it does come with some level of shame, it's not the kind of shame that will make you deny your poverty. It's the kind of shame that will want you to get out of that situation. Social mobility in terms of intellectualism, in terms of information, it's different because nobody wants to be told they are stupid. It's like a slur in and of itself. Nobody wants to be treated like an idiot. Unlike social mobility in terms of wealth, which can be analyzed and policy can be made to actually promote mobility in such situation. Social mobility in terms of knowledge is very difficult to quantify. Traditional education gave us that ability because we could say, okay, this person has a bachelor's degree. How do we make it easier for them to do a master's or a PhD? This person has finished high school. How do we make it easier for them to go to the next level? But you cannot do that with the internet. Like, you cannot just sit down and say, okay, how do we make people get informed on a particular thing? You can't even have that conversation about social mobility in terms of people's information on the internet. In fact, sometimes back in the US, they tried this with the likes of, we are going to point out misinformation in the internet, especially after COVID, where they were like, okay, not everybody knows things, so we are going to use our knowledge to point out misinformation in the COVID space. There was a reaction to those policies about social media platform flagging out misinformation. Elon Musk went and bought Twitter because he said that this idea of controlling information is actually anti-free speech. And even later, after the Republican government won, Mark Zuckerberg went on record to say that they will no longer be flagging misinformation in his platform. And when you consider democracy as a system that allows people to deliberate, then you can understand that education is the foundation above which democracy is built. Information mobility is something that we really have to care about. As the educated become even more educated thanks to the internet, and the uneducated believe they are educated so they don't bother educating themselves, then the gap between the educated and the uneducated continues to grow rapidly, and the level of anti-intellectualism worsens. It will be very difficult to get a solution for this.
Let's take a recap on what we have so far. So on the one hand, we have social media that has the potential to provide political knowledge to a lot of people. It's an avenue for political expression that could lead to political action, and it can also act as a news source. While on the other side, we have seen that social media can create social news gap where people receive different news based on who is telling the news. It can also lead to filter bubbles and even get colonized by fake news in some instances. Social media is fast-paced, which leads to news fatigue. We have also seen how social media makes the world appear more complex, that could lead to dualism and conspiracy theories. And lastly, we have covered how social media can promote anti-intellectualism. Now, if we go back to the title, are the two compatible? That is social media and democracy. Well, in my opinion, three things will make the two compatible. One, we need to break up the tech giants that monopolizes on social media. If you want to have more democratic information sharing, you cannot have it controlled by one single company. And that, of course, means that two, we have to democratize social media, where more information is accessible to more people. Of course, this has its challenges, because one, you have to think about how will that social media platform run, how will developers be paid. Social media moderation will be difficult, and third, there need to be regulatory pressure for new algorithms that allow people to see different information from different sources. I think there are problems that cannot really be solved. The problem of anti-intellectualism, where people think they are informed even when they are not, that will always dominate social media. People will always look at the headlines and make a conclusion of that. If we look at these three points, like the first point, we need to break up tech monopolies. Is that really possible? Is that really feasible? I don't think so. I think that will never happen in a free market. Democratizing social media also has its problems. Like, how do you moderate content? Who decide what content stays and which contents go? And when you talk about pressuring new algorithms, that also presents the problem of government getting into corporate business, which also will be very opposed by the free market enthusiasts. We also see a lot of the pretend free speech connoisseurs who would defend social media with their life, especially if it pushes the agenda that they want to believe in. This, I think, leads me to the conclusion that I don't think the two are compatible. Social media is an evil that democracy will have to learn to live with. And the reason that democracy will find it very hard to handle social media is because most democracies are dysfunctional. People don't trust their government, and to some extent the government don't even trust their people. Social media offers people with the freedom of speech rhetoric now and in the foreseeable future. Social media will continue to ride on the free speech rhetoric, and appear as the good guys that gave voice to people who never had one. And that will make it even harder for us to attain freedom of expression, because social media are anti-freedom of expression. And governments are not trusted, which a lot of people wouldn't trust government to decide what counts as free speech. It is one of the byproducts of dysfunctional democracies. Thank you for watching this video. It's my first video on the platform, and I intend to make more. If you liked my content, you can subscribe to my channel. See you in the next video, and have a great day. Bye.